how many of you are new to Asian House? Just a show of hands, please. Thank you very much. We are joined this evening by Indian poet, writer, translator, and activist Meena Kandasamy to talk about her new novel, When I Hit You, or A Portrait of a Writer as a Young Wife, published by Atlantic Books. Meena recently moved to London, and we're very fortunate to have her here with us this evening. Before we go on to talk about the book in depth, I just would like to refresh your memory about her background. Meena has previously published 2 collections of poetry, Touch and Miss Militancy, and the critically acclaimed novel, The Gypsy Goddess, which was longlisted for the Dylan Thomas Prize and shortlisted for the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature in 2013. Her works have been published in various anthologies and journals that include Anthology of Contemporary Indian Poetry, The Little Magazine, Kavya Bharati, Poetry International Web, News India, Quarterly Literary Review, Outlook, Teherka, and the New Indian Express. As an activist, she works closely with issues of caste and gender, and how society puts people into stereotypical roles on the basis of these categories. Meena writes in English, but she's also translated poetry and prose from Tamil. These are just a few of her achievements to date, and perhaps there's more that she'll be able to share with you this evening about her future plans. Also, if you haven't read When I Hit You, then you might have read several reviews of it, one of which was actually published in The Guardian last weekend. It was a review by Pratita Neja. And when I saw it, I was so excited because I knew that she was going to be here today to talk to you. And tonight we have both copies of both The Gypsy Goddess and When I Hit You available on sale. So having said all of that, welcome. Welcome, Meena. Thank you so much for joining us. Can I just start by telling you how hard this story has hit me. And the story of your protagonist really deeply touched me. Her strength and refusal to give up. Can you please tell us a bit about how you worked up the courage to write such a personal feeling account of domestic abuse?
Yes, I think courage is a very good word, because what actually prevents a lot of people to even leave a bad marriage is the fact that they have to talk about it. The fact that you have to say that these things happen to me, and somehow it's a devaluation of you. And we live in a society with so much of victim blaming, where if any woman goes and says, well, my husband is hitting me, the immediate assumption is that, oh, you are cheating on him, or you are lying to him. Or if any woman says that, oh, somebody raped me, the immediate assumption is that you were asking for it, you were not dressed. So we live in a society where when a woman stands up and says that she has been a victim of horrific violence, that everybody turns to it and says, oh, what did you do? Why did you get this? And therefore, I think that when this is like everyday normal, societal reaction to something like this, putting it into fiction is something else, because I think one of the challenges, because fiction is, if you don't do it well, everybody's going to say, oh, it's a book about wife beating. I know somebody else who got beaten up. It happens to you, it happens to everybody. So it becomes so commonplace. And in that sense, it loses out from becoming literature or high art. And on the other hand, the other thing for which you really need courage is to also talk about something which is so horrific, but at the same time not feed into it. The idea was that I wanted to write about. It's obviously based on my own experience, but it's also fictionalized. It's also so many of the identifying tropes, stuff, things that happened to me before, where I was living, what I did with my life. A lot of it is hugely fictionalized around it, but to give the central story of what could happen within an abusive marriage. And so when you try to, like, especially for me to try to tell the story, it took, yes, courage, but also it took me a lot of effort to make sure that when you read about this woman getting hit, you don't become a voyeur to it. Like, people don't get, they don't get off on seeing this women going through this experience. So you have to write it in the sense that you don't feed this passive masculinity, this passive society that expects women to suffer. So you have to write it in a way in which your women is stronger than any other woman can be. It's a lot of inner strength that's never shown, but has to come through.
Amazing. But I've been going through a lot of the articles that have been written about the book, and they all seem to say, oh, it's loosely based on her own experiences or her own memoirs. So I'd like to ask you, to what extent would you say that the story is loyal to your reality?
To what extent is the story? I don't know, as we were discussing earlier, this is not something I can give a number on and say, okay, it's 80% like my life. It's some of what happened is 100% my life. But at the same time, I think it's not a memoir for at least as a writer for me, for very certain reasons, because I think I am someday going to write my life story. I'm going to name names. I'm going to, and I don't think I'm going to think of craft at the time, because it's possibly going to be like, people who were shit to me, people who I hate, people who were nice to me, people who betrayed me. You know what I mean? Like, if you have lived a long enough life and you've done stuff and you want to write a story, you want to write it like that. But it's a very interesting question, because I'm also a poet, and I often think, why did I not write poetry about this? And when I look at why I didn't write poetry about it, I can understand why I wrote a novel, because I thought poetry is, savage, but it's very angry and it's very explosive. But poetry does not do justice to the cruelty, the slow burning cruelty of abusive marriage. And I thought, if I wrote poetry, I was just being kind, This does not require that explosive rage. This requires something that's far more like, it's like I really had to pin this marriage on a dissection table and take it apart, like really slowly, really cruelly, but really artfully, so that each part of it came through. And I think that, just to combust in rage, I just did not want to do that to this experience. And I think that's the same reason why I don't want to write it as a memoir, because I think my memoir is the story of my life, which I think is a lot of fun, and it's not about 4 months of bad marriage. And I think a memoir is also about, if you look at the lives of men and how it's narrated, women always end up in footnotes, and I have no intention of putting men anywhere except in my footnotes. so I think when I write my life, it's going to be a different story, and I think it's going to be something like Mata fucking Hari, what I mean? But it's certainly not a story of, I suffered, because I think this suffering that happened to me is something that, I wanted to portray it within a certain fictional setting, to allow anybody else to inhabit it, so that it doesn't become, that's what happened to this Kandasamy lady. It's something that could happen to everyone. Everybody who walked through the story could see this happening to them.
Talking about poetry earlier, actually the way it's written is quite poetic. I mean, there's certain sentences that follow one another and that are really, they run like poetry. And so I don't think that, it's not as if you haven't written poetry within the book. There's a lot of poetry. But then there's another question I wanted to ask you, is that, so your protagonist survives this deadly combination of physical violence, emotional abuse, and sexual assault, all at the same time. And then she has the strength to actually walk out. According to a survey from just a decade ago, about 85% of women who suffered sexual violence in or outside of marriage never sought help, and only 1% reported it to the police. Do you think that much has changed in the last decade?
No, I think that we don't have the best legal mechanisms to support network for this kind of thing, but also, you said three things which are, sexual assault, emotional abuse, and physical violence. But I think that in the Indian context, if you look at it, there's a lot of caste element that operates within marriages. For instance, it's a country of arranged marriages, so sometimes people marry across caste, and it causes its own, set of tensions. Or there's a huge. Recently, there was this death of an Indian woman in Australia because she refused to give dowry, and so I think every 90 minutes or something, one Indian woman is burned to death. And I think that, in fact, when I was choosing these three themes to dwell on, I was actually also not writing about other stuff which do kill women within marriages. So I think it's much more sinister than my book can ever be. There's caste, there's honor killings, there's also there's dowry deaths, so there's all sort of this nested thing that's going on there with the institution of marriage. And I don't think it's not so easy as to say, the situation has improved or stuff has happened. I just think that retaining this kind of violence around and within marriage is very central to India as a caste society and as a patriarchal society more than anything else.
Just when you were saying about the book, because I have that exact quote here.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I read it?
Please.
So you wrote, "Tradition never goes out of fashion. Remaining in public memory, it wears new clothes. In India, a bride is burnt every 90 minutes. The time it takes to fix a quick dinner, the time it takes to do the dishes, the time it takes to wash a load of clothing, the time it takes to commute to work. This is the official statistic. The death, the police do not even bother trying to hide the semantics. The real truth lies in the wailing that never ceases at the burns wards of hospitals." That's the quote. So, I mean, in relation to that, I had another question about feminism, but I'll ask that first and then go back.
Yes.
Do you think that feminism has the power to turn misogynistic, patriarchal societies into women-valuing civilizations? And do you think that this requires part of the existing culture to die out?
See, if it does, it's not a question of will the culture die out. I think we have to very systematically kill it out. Just the same thing with caste, for instance. People have to consciously rebel about it. We cannot say, but in 10 generations it's going to go, because it's just not gone like that. So you have to consciously sabotage it. And I think it's the same with feminism as well. Like, if you wait for male supremacy to die out, it doesn't die out. Like let's say people of my grandmother's generation never worked. People of my mom's generation started going out to work, but does it mean that things changed? No, these women became women of earn, but also get beaten up. So like people of my generation, and you go to university, you get the most highest possible degree that universities can award you. Does it mean male violence stops on you? No, you just become a very educated woman who gets hit by her husband. So I think, on one hand, we assume that for some reason, all these advances in society, education, economic, are just going to empower and change. But I think unless we consciously, learn where to and to root out patriarchy, to call out patriarchy, to call out all these, everyday cultural things, I don't think it can happen at all. And like recently, I was like having this. I have a lot of soul searching conversations, and I was like, my father was not a feminist, but one of the things in which he changed me was like, he never let me feel that I was intellectually inferior to a man, and I cannot thank him enough for that. Because imagine if I had been told as a child that I couldn't come up with ideas, that I couldn't do things, or I couldn't express myself. Like, I just don't even know how. I don't even know how it would be to be on another plane where I thought I deserved it, or I was not good enough, or men were indeed superior. Because there's a lot of people who are actually told that, and for once I think I had a father who told me, And who actually stood up to teachers who were telling, but yeah, Meena doesn't behave like how a girl is supposed to behave. And he's like, yeah, if you want to behave like how a girl is supposed to behave, it's your call, but my daughter is not going to do that, you know. In a sense, he never let me think of myself as somebody's, you know, intellectual inferior. And I think that's liberating. So I think that the change has to come in that sense, you know. And I think a part of what made my father respect women is the way he respected my mother's intelligence. So I think all of this is linked in a sense that, yeah, eventually, I'm sorry for taking personal examples, but I think eventually, yes, that, yeah, men have to start seeing the point and have to start accepting women as true equals. And yes, I think feminism has to be at the fight for it. So, yeah.
So how do you think men will get to see the light?
Well, I think there's some of the male responses to even this book. I'm not saying that this is the book that's going to change things. Has been, you know, like has been really instructive on what's wrong and what's right. So there are men who are saying to me things like, yeah, it's very complicated to explain, but I can understand that I would have behaved like the way his husband would behave, and thank you for writing this, thank you for saving me from what I could have become. But on the other hand, there are men who write to me and say like, yeah, my 20-year-old wife left me and I read your whole book and I didn't do anything that your husband did, but why did she leave me? You know, you don't answer me. And somebody says that I'm willing to marry you. The proposal may be blunt, but it's not absurd. You know what I mean? Like as if I need some saving. Or like somebody else saying that, have you noticed the possibility that somebody in your family could have narcissistic personality disorder? Maybe you should go into therapy, because the problem is that you just cannot think that you're wrong, you know. So you have all kinds of male responses, and then you realize, oh, where are we as a society? You know, like how is it even possible that you know, this kind of thing can happen? And I think, yeah, for men seeing the light, you know, on live television I've been asked, how is it possible for a male to rape his wife? Because the idea is that, you know, it's the wife, it's the goddamn fucking, you know, his handbag, it's his purse, like it's his belonging, like, so how can it even be seen as a violation? So I think these are the type of conversations we are having, and, you know, for that to move to a level where, you know, civility and decency, I think it's a really big bridge that has to be built, but I think it will eventually happen, isn't it? When women start speaking out, when women start calling out, and stuff like that.
There are many other topics that are of concern to women all across the world, and I think they should also be of concern to men, and which you touch upon in the novel, such as marital rape and bride burning. These and other acts of violence that are inflicted on women are horrific because they show how uncivilized patriarchal societies are. In 2012, the Thomson Reuters Foundation ranked India as the worst G20 country in which to be a woman. To what extent would you say that the justice system and the government are responsible for the deaths of women due to such causes?
I think that, yeah, I'm not sure I can lay all the blame on, you know, the state apparatus, because this is hugely cultural, and this hugely, you know, a takeoff from, yeah, this is our religion, this is our culture, this is our caste, this is how we do it, this is what women do. So I think it's sanctioned largely by social apparatus, and I don't think, yeah, we have like a revolutionary government, you know, like, but at the same time we have to think of, you know, for instance, the Indian Constitution as a constitution that was written by somebody who's very visionary and revolutionary in his own way. So you have a constitution that protects the rights of women, for instance, gives them inheritance rights, you know, it gave them universal adult suffrage much before even some parts of Europe had that. So in a sense, yeah, within the law you're treated as equal, but in the implementation itself you just are not equal. So men go about, you know, like exploiting the legal sections. For instance, like I think this is something like in a police station, if when women take a complaint, it's always like nobody sees that her life is a threat, or like she could be like in a very dangerous position. So So the idea is that, oh, but it's only your husband beating you, come on, don't make a hue and cry about it. And the other day there was a story on NDTV just 4 or 5 days ago saying that a woman's husband was beating her head with an axe and he actually ended up killing her. She was asking for help from the neighbors and they were busy filming it on mobile phones but nobody intervened. And I think that's the whole thing, like, as a husband you're allowed to do so much, so you can do this to your wife, that. But he's beating his wife, you know, as meaning that she's not even an individual there, she's an extension of him, like she's his property, she's something like that. And I think this is the kind of carelessness about society that, you know, we have to really point fingers up and say, oh, but this must stop. And I think it's all around because, for instance, with the law, it should be such a shame that, you know, the sex ratio is 900 and something for 1,000 boys, which means that for every 9 women you see, there's a 10th dead girl, because that's clearly sex-selective abortion that's going on in the country. And when you realize that 9 girls is possibly just the front 2 rows of this, and you understand that's a dead person, then you understand it's a country of 1 billion, and you can understand the hatred towards women that just exists in this place. And I think that's very risky, and I don't think the law is doing enough on all those fronts. It's not doing enough for the children, it's not doing enough for mothers, it's not doing enough for wives, it's not doing enough for people, you know, who get into education institutions. So I think there is a big, yeah.
Why do you think there's so much hatred towards women?
I don't know. I have thought about it as well, like why hate somebody or a whole species of people so much. I think some parts of the tension about women came because it is a caste society, which means your caste or your caste purity is compromised when women marry outsiders. So women had to be controlled, they had to be put in their place, they had to adhere to all of this so that they could marry within their caste, which means the child would be pure and of the same caste. And so caste purity itself could be kept in control. But I think what has happened is that even people who are outside or who are renounced caste, like very progressive people, have still kept the misogyny intact, even if they might have shed the layer of caste. So I think this whole idea is that, oh, but if she loses her virginity, or if she does this, or if she sleeps with somebody else, then his purity is threatened. So women become non-autonomous creatures. So once you're a non-autonomous creature, you're no longer a human being, or no longer equal, you know. So you have to be protected, guarded, all of this for, you know, the honor and stuff like this to be, you know, to be maintained. And I think it's a largely Salvation phenomena of blaming women for what happens to them, and also hating them for what happens to them. And it's not just marriages, because I speak about marriages because in all our eyes it's this very romantic, pure, happy idea. But I've interviewed female militants, and they tell, there was a female militant from Sri Lanka who told me, I have felt that the corpse was treated better than me when we were in the same room, because this woman was, as a militant, she was raped later on by the Sri Lankan army, and so she was seen as something more despicable than a corpse. And that really points out to what's so wrong with our society. The fact that this was a militant who spent years of her life, part of a liberation struggle, fighting for a homeland, was willing to give her life for your country's liberation. But the minute she becomes a victim of rape, she becomes so polluted to you, she becomes such a dirty object to you, she becomes somebody you can revile and spit at. And I think that's the same, isn't it? Like, whether it's a militant or whether it's a wife, like, once you are at the receiving end of male violence, you become something so dirty, like, which is also why I think the question of shame comes into play, which is why women don't speak out, which also means you legitimize men's behavior for longer and longer and longer periods of time.
Of course, so in the book, you chose to depict a protagonist from a petty bourgeoisie background, knowing that the poor, lower caste women's suffering has been neglected for many years.
Yeah.
In especially in literature, as well as, I mean, fiction and non-fiction,
Yeah.
I think. So was that a conscious choice, or?
No, I think it's an interesting question because my first novel is set in this remote village in the south of India, and the characters are, female landless agricultural laborers who also happen to be Dalit. They really marginalized women, and I think, in a sense, yeah, the village is the central character, but you also have a very old woman. Because I also think you don't see old women enough in literature. So, who is at the heart of holding this village together? So, for me, that's important to write about. At the same time, I think what we do in terms of privilege theory, which I have many issues with, is that we think only the most oppressed are genuinely oppressed, and therefore only they can speak. So yes, they become old women in a village like that, who's landless, widowed, untouchable, and fighting, and lost her family. Yes, she's right to speak, or she has the voice or agency to speak. But on the other, and she's a true victim. But I think on the other hand, in saying this, that but your privilege, your education privileges you, your race privileges you, your color privileges you, your economic strata privileges you, is also sometimes shutting up people who we don't like or whose voices we don't want to hear. So if somebody says, but you're educated, so you're privileged, but my PhD doesn't save me from being raped, you know what I mean? Like, your degree is for all, like when you're facing brute violence. And I think, in the sense, the idea is that when people speak, even middle class women, when they speak of wife beating, they always think of that as something the rickshaw driver does to his wife, or the every daily wage laborer does to his wife, but never something that happens to them. So it's almost caricaturally a working class thing. And I don't think it's a working class problem. It's just there across society. And I also think that one of the things about my own friends on the left is that you concentrate very much on the problems of the working class, which is well and good, because yes, they're the most oppressed, most exploited. But I also think that we must open ourselves more to understand that to call out oppression wherever it happens. So if middle class women are beaten up, no, it's not nobody's problem, it is everybody's problem, you know what I mean? Like, it's not somebody's mistake that they chose to be middle class, so I think in that sense, I think, you have to really shine a light on what is happening there. So I don't think, your class can empower you to walk away. I think that, sometimes you may have money to buy a hotel, but you don't have the, ability to step out of your own home. And I think there are many women caught in marriages like that. So, I don't think it was necessarily by writing or shining the spotlight on middle class women, I silenced the voices of, working class women who suffer, because I think that would be a very twisted reading. On the other hand, I think by choosing such a protagonist, it allows you to take this violence from the realm of the physical into the realm of the intellectual, and to have conversations about it. Also because we live in a society where if somebody says they were beaten, it don't mean that importance. But if somebody does a whole zigzag about it, and goes into understanding, violence very, very intellectual, then you're like, oh, well, there is a point there. So I think, it's such a problem. So I love to explore things.
So on a more kind of real level, so the character in the novel, she's quite educated, she's quite aware of herself and of her surroundings, of what's happening in the world, she's well read, and that's partly why she's powerful, because she knows how to use her mind, and she knows how to occupy her mind amidst all the violence. And in the end, she obviously manages to escape that environment of violence. But when you think about women who've never had a day of schooling in their lives, who've been married off, who have had kids, maybe 5 or 6 kids, and they're bound by their violent marriages, how do you think they can kind of escape? How do you think they can get away?
No, I think the question of, for instance, children complicates this entire thing because there's even more intense and huge pressure on the women not to walk away saying that you're a bad mother or, your child needs a father. And I think, and I also think that we live in a society where we were earlier talking about legal procedures, and I just remembered that for any woman, if she's separating from her husband, you still have to attend 2 or 3 sessions of counseling together with this very manipulative person to convince people that you have the right to move away, and somebody has to be convinced that these 2 people are incompatible, which means you have to. I used to do that in my own case, but I think that for women to go through this, the shame of narrative, the shame of telling others about it, the shame of having to prove all of this, and also handle this with your own children, because what do children understand about violence? Because I think when you talk about women with 4 or 5 children, I also think this beating of women is also, we live in a society where children are beating up themselves for their own good, and it's completely normal. Like parents think that, oh, I'm doing this, that I'm beating you today so that you don't do the mistake tomorrow. So we live in a world where either women are infantilized and they're treated just like the children are treated, which is as objects and recipients of beatings. And I think where children cannot know the difference because they themselves are, disciplined through this process of, oh, you're being hit so that you don't do a mistake. Therefore, your mom is being hit because she did a mistake. And I think they live in a world where they cannot even assess for themselves that this violence is bad. And I therefore think that it's really not easy. But that's also where I think either the state has to step in, but much more than that, it's about families. So often it's like, oh, but don't come away. The entire idea is that parents would rather have your corpse back rather than have you leave a marriage. They are trying to guard some fictional idea of, the successful married daughter or whatever it is, or the honor of the family or whatever it is. And I think this is where, family structures completely are against women, because women run back to their parents and they're sent back again, they run back to their parents and sent back again. So it becomes a wholly recurrent cycle in which they know that this man is going to abuse the daughter. So every moment they possibly pray that nothing deadly happens at the same time. They're putting this woman back, not once, but repeatedly into the hands of, an abusive person. And I think it's where I think everybody has to change, parents, the society, the legal system, the police system.
But at the same time, it's quite interesting that this educated protagonist in the novel is drawn to a man who's as masochistic as he is egoistic. So, in a way, this is going to sound very silly, perhaps, but are you suggesting that perhaps some women writers are drawn to troubled men? Is it possible? I don't know. I mean, because he's not your usual character, is he? The husband in the novel.
No, but is there a trope like troubled men? Because you don't know if that exists. Like, are there troubled people? All of us are troubled, so I'm not sure anybody is a troubled person. Are people violent? Is there violent? But I'm not sure. This question of troubled men sounds different. But I don't know. I'm not sure I can say who I'm drawn to or who's drawn to me. So on the one hand, because I'm a total creep and I work with so many people. So many people. Because you just all the same. I also think that people can hide layers and layers of violence behind what sounds radical, things like that. I don't know. I don't think writers are drawn to troubled men as much as they are drawn to broke men, for example. I'm always drawn to somebody who has nothing in their bank account. So it's part of it is vaguely charming, part of it is the fear that each men are boring, which they turn out to be. So So yes, I think that the things that I think a writer finds endearing are not. I don't know. It's a question of what you are as a writer. So, a person with the more striking personality possibly attracts you, and I think a striking personality maybe comes with its own overimposed baggage. Yeah. But also part of it is the spirit of adventure, isn't it? But yeah, I'm not sure that everybody who gets beaten up by the husband is because they choose to be adventurous, you know. Yeah, I don't think that's the situation, but you know. With Sylvia Plath, for instance, is now there's all these letters of hers which are saying that, yeah, Ted, whose abuse we all thought was only emotional, was possibly also hurting, but gaslighting and stuff like this. And then do we blame Sylvia for being attracted to him? Like, he writes good poetry, you know what I mean? Like, I would be attracted to Ted Hughes, I don't know, like, just read his poetry, it's awesome, it's fucking good. But yeah, so you can't judge the woman, like, it's up to the man to have been a better person,
Yeah, but I think, in a way, people don't get married thinking that they're going to turn each other into better people. I think that's never on the agenda, is it?
I want to turn everybody into a better person. I don't even marry everybody, you know what I mean? Like, I'm like, yeah, 5 minutes with me and let's see how I can fix you up.
So would you define your novel as an act of feminism?
I think writing is an act of feminism because, sometimes I get hurt. And for me, yes, I think, the fact that not only this novel, I think all of what I've written, I see it as acts of feminism because, for instance, if I write about communism, I think that we have had a whole tradition of men who write in communism. We don't have as many women who comment about the state of our nation or society or nation building or any of that, or the class struggle. So I think that when you make an incursion into a space that's not generally written about from a female perspective, then yeah, you're empowering yourself to be the best, which I think is an act of feminism.
And do you think that feminism means, in essence, the strength to be able to love yourself regardless of the way society has tried to break you?
And I think feminism means a lot of things. I think for me, at the heart of it, it means the struggle for equality, to be heard, for instance. Like men are often heard. One of the big complaints that you can hear women across all cultural, economic, racial backgrounds is that he never listens to me because I think as a people we just tune out when women speak. So to be heard, to be read, I think all of it is reclaiming space for the women's voice, which I think it begins in childhood. We just don't listen to our moms. We're like There's something about the way we share, and I think just to be able to claim to throw women's voice out there, that's feminism. One of the things of feminism.
Yeah, so many things. I don't have any questions left. Do you have questions? Can we take some questions?
Yeah. Oh.
No question. So the book is very much about erasure. It's the erasure of who the woman is at the hands of her husband.
No, I didn't the book is about erasure.
Erasure, yeah.
Erasure,
So it's about the erasure of who the woman is at the hands of her husband, also to a degree how the label of being a victim is also partly an erasure. It's recognizing someone as a label rather than as a person. I was wondering, just as a woman of colour, being published in the UK, is there a continuance of that feeling of erasure? I mean, your experience of being published here?
Baiting me. You're waiting for me to say something controversial.
That's the only reason I came.
I don't know how to answer that question because the thing with writers is that we take everything as personal. So yeah, it's like nobody loves me now, but I don't cry. Yeah, I'm so misunderstood. No one's driving up, no one's reading it, no one's buying it, no one's turned up. So it's very possible. But I also think that I would like to look at everything in balance. And I started out as an activist when I was 17 in India. I was editing a magazine at that time. I was writing for newspapers by the time I was 22. So in India, I have like at least 15 to 16 years of very solid, active public life, which has included like appearing on 3 different channels in one evening because they wanted somebody to comment on something. So you leave a life like that behind, and then you come here and you start as a nobody. And you're going to peg your expectations really low, and you're expecting that after 15 years in public life in Britain, where would I be? And if I'm nowhere, then I'm going to say, yes, there's structural, systematic problems. But I don't expect that I'm going to have any carryover from India or, any of the Divadam from India translating into Divadam in London, because I did like, I think, 15 or 16 interviews of this book, and I just didn't even go to India. The sales are really good. It's generating a lot of talk. And then you realize that, Hindustan Times gave me like a 2-page spread. Times of India doesn't do anything to do with books, but they still made me write about it. So yeah, it's been like really gorgeous, the press in India. And you do 14 interviews in India, and you don't do anything in the press here, and then you're like, well, is that a race problem? And you think it. But at the same time, I know that to get there in India is not something that happens. I had to struggle for 15 years I've been there. So why I know I've worked for it, I've earned it in a way in which I can never say I've done the same here. So yeah, I don't think that, I'm not sure it's erasure, I'm sure. I just think that, I have to write more, do more, and eventually I think, there will be attention, because the things that you're saying are things that people need to be talking about. So I don't know. I try not to internalize it. And also because I come from a culture where, when I first said to my father that I wanted to be a writer, my father was like, but I'm not Tata, I'm not Brilla, how are you going to be written? How are you going to even get published? Because he saw it as a situation, complete hopelessness, that a person with no connections to the literary industry. My father doesn't speak a word of English, so a person like him with no connections is himself a migrant in the city where he is. How does he see his daughter making it? So it's trying to discourage me, and I think that in India I had to cross through the hurdles of caste, cross through the hurdles of not knowing anybody, cross through too many hurdles to get to where I am now. And I think it's not going to be any easier here.
I'll ask you again in 15 years' time, right?
Yeah. Is there any other question? Yes.
To be honest, I've only stumbled across your work in the past week.
Oh.
Maybe because you're very young and you started writing long after I left India. But I was so happy. No, I'm just happy. I'm impressed. You're so young and you've done all of that. But I was looking you up yesterday, on Wikipedia and all your Facebook page and everything. And I had no idea this was happening today. But I was frantically trying to get a ticket. I said, I have to go, because everything that you write about, the feminism, the activism, all of that is very close to my heart. But most importantly, I was really fascinated by the translation that you've done of Dalit literature. And it's something that I would like to, someday. I'm very interested in mythology, and I think a lot of the Dalit views on mythology, their perspective on it, is very different from the mainstream. And I think that's lost, and we're losing it. And I wanted to sort of ask you, does it play a part in, there is the huge caste divide, of course, but because the mainstream doesn't quite get, because they voice their own perspective on things is never heard, do you think they continue to be, not just in the financial world, the actual real world, but because they're very core of where they come from, how they see things, is never really heard. We don't know. I mean, I know a lot of myths, whether it's the gods, the goddesses, and everything. They're very different when you look at the Dalit literature. And I wonder if you've come across the reason why the casting is never really filled up is because we just don't know. The mainstream just doesn't know where they come from.
Oh, well, don't include me in your way.
Yeah, most of us, yeah.
Well, I think that I think my issues with for instance, the mainstream and its consumption of Dalit literature is that the mainstream tends to look at Dalit literature as a kind of the literature of compassion, meaning that a literature that makes them feel, oh, we are so good because we feel so bad for these poor people. Whereas Dalit literature is very militant, Dalit literature is very revolutionary, it doesn't get the same kind of traction within the media, within sales, within big publishing houses. And all of the literature that I have translated from Tamil Dalit has been political work or has been poetry, all of which are hugely transgressive and not necessarily adhere to, oh, but I was born very poor. And I come from not necessarily a scheduled caste background or an untouchable background. I come from a nomadic tribe, which is highly marginalized and whose traditional occupation is being a witch doctor or surviving through begging, which now I've perfected. But what happens is that, yes, there's all of this myth, all of this, but I don't think that's the reason why people are mistreated, just because they don't know my myth doesn't mean, doesn't make anybody mistreat me.
No, that's true.
Like, it's about what surname I have, like, am I Meena Iyer or Iyenka or anything that carries weight, or Meena Kandasamy, a name which you cannot place because it's just my father's name and not a caste name. So the fact that, if I told you that in my tribe people are buried sitting in a sitting position, would that change the way you look at me? I think it's only going to make people, I don't know, what kind of understanding would that bring? Would that make you treat me more equal? I'm not sure. I think it's a certain exoticization that would only, make the other even more other, because I don't think that just knowing these myths would shatter things, or knowing that there are different retellings or different realities would shatter. Well, I think that I think at the heart of it, and I think this was also a political project, because if you look at, especially from Tamil Nadu, retelling the Ramayana was a huge project that the Patriarchist movement launched to say that this is not the only version of the story, to say that we are Dravidians and people of the south are demonized, we are portrayed as monkeys in literature, and so we want to strike back against this mono Indian culture. And I think it is, as much as there are individual stories, I think it was very much a political project, and I think very much that was not only Dalit but also pan-Dravidian in the sense of writing back and of resisting. But I'm not sure, as somebody who's also, I myself tried to retell Tamil and Hindu myths in my poetry, and as much as I find it empowering, I also am not sure that's the only thing that's going to, because nobody believes they are superior only based on myths. They believe that they are superior because they have taken it for granted that others are inferior. So, women are just stupid, getting across the caste divide, and then of course for the men they have their own hierarchies. So I think that it's going to take a lot more than just telling stories. Yes.
Gentleman in the white jacket.
Just bought your book recently. Unfortunately, I didn't have the time to read it yet, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, sure.
And two questions I have. One is about what you said about the shelters, the lack of help for women who are facing such abusive relationships. There's a movie that's going to come out called The Lipstick Under My Burqa, if you know it. That basically, without spoiling it too much, moral of that movie is that sisterhood can't smash patriarchy. Like, there aren't enough shelters or job training programs for women who forgo the safety net of the Indian family. So I just wanted to ask, what's the state of such activity India to provide such support? And my second question is that you mentioned divorce. I mean, in India, different religious communities have different divorce laws. And I'm not going to say one is better than the other, but at least with the Hindu Marriage Act, the fact, just to get a divorce, a mutually agreeable divorce, there's so many conditions which have to be fulfilled, like husband or wife has to convert, one has to be missing for a long time. And that's and from some of my lawyer friends here, they said getting a divorce in the UK, it's pretty much the same thing. So Hindu marriage law is somewhat very Victorian in its morality, so would you agree with or disagree with that?
I don't know, I'm trying to still get divorced. I left marriage I think 5 years ago, but yeah, I haven't got my papers, and yeah, it's an ongoing legal trauma that I face. Like, yeah, even from here, it just keeps haunting me. So I don't know. I think you can leave a man, you can't leave the paperwork. So it's not really easy, and also it also becomes an extension of the humiliation that you go in a marriage, because now you're questioned in a courtroom, you're cross-examined in a courtroom by complete strangers, and so it's just not easy to stand up and say. And I actually remember, like, once in a courtroom, the policewoman came to me and said, "Why are you crossing your legs?" I was sitting like this, so that's apparently a disrespect to the court. You don't have any clue what I've been through, and this is just the way you want to like talk to me. So I think that it's not easy to say one, but I also think that in a culture like India, if you spend a night at a shelter, then we are going to be a country of gossip and talk, like what was she doing that night away. So most women would rather make sure they have an alibi, either a close family, their own birth parents, or rather spend their time with the abusive and even go to a third place to be completely sullied. And I think that this is something that we carry over, because I have friends here from the Salvation diaspora who went to a shelter and then went back to the husband who blinded her. So, and she did this because she was like, she saw herself as having no hope or a future, and just hours and hours and hours of trying to talk her out of it doesn't work, because she believes in, like, your marriage is for life, and what do you do with somebody who really believes that a marriage is for life? And so I think it has to take a lot more of I think cultural conditioning for us to look at it as normal, But I think we'll get there eventually. We have to do that. Yes?
Please, the lady in the
Firstly, you said that you take everything very personally, so please say the personally when I say I loved your book. And secondly, my question is activism integral to your fiction?
Yes and no, because sometimes there's the danger that it was actually a joke, but my partner, for instance, writes in Tunisia, and I write I was writing this novel, and somebody said to me, he's a very close friend of the family, who said he was imagining a situation where the files of his work, he was sharing a complete of the time, would get into my novel. And I think that actually happens to activists or novelists, like your activist stuff can enter your novel in like very porous ways. And I think for me these are very like if I'm an activist and I'm writing an essay, it's a very different genre than writing a novel. And I don't think I would inflict my activism on the word of the novel. Like I know where my sympathies are, which I would never compromise on, but I think the style and the language are two different things sometimes. I don't think that I would be as enraged as I am as an activist, or as somebody who writes an op-ed. When I write a novel, I just think they are two different things. And in one you're preaching to the converted or something, in the other you have to be from artistic, crafty, or in the sense of cunning.
Gentleman back, please.
Yeah, so you talked a lot about the...
I talked a lot.
It was very interesting.
I get that impression as well. What is the question?
But talked a lot about the, this clash, I guess, with the Indian kind of patriarchal society. Yet we're seeing, the culture in India kind of lurching more towards, the right wing, towards nationalism and so on. So very interested to hear your views on, why do you think that is, and you're actually seeing it throughout the world now, like in the US with Trump and all that. So almost kind of, defeating the tenets of feminism. So why do you think that is? And, what can we do to solve it?
No, I think that the rise of the right is very scary, but we also have to understand that the right in India is taking up the space that the genuine left has ceded to them, which is sad. I remember being in Kochi sometime last year, in February, and there was this a meeting of Durga Vahini, or one of these RSS right-wing women groups, who were talking about things like, oh, you think women are prostitutes? Is this how you treat women? And for some reason they were co-opting the language of feminism to, because there are women who are abused, there are women who need some space, and when the left doesn't take up, issues of feminism, take up issues of violence, then the right simply, makes use of these women and says, oh, now we are going to put you on bikes, now we are going to give you self-defense lessons, now we are going to empower you. So it becomes a very, a very insidious way of getting women to actually join the right wing. Like we are saying that you're going to be brave warriors for the country, you're going to do this, going to do that. And I think it's very crazy. But I also think that I would never be, personally as an Indian, I would never be scared by the right of the right. I still remember, it's just the fact. My father was an RSS patriarch. He was until he married my mom, and it's not like my mom changed him. He got out of the RSS because obviously they were very abusive on caste issues and he just did not see eye to eye with them like he saw. He was a Tamil scholar, and he thought that RSS was very anti-Tamil or anti, at the heart of it, they never respected the language and were always trying to, inculcate or force sensitivity to the language, which as a Tamil scholar he was rebelling against. And there was lots of reasons why he left the RSS. And I still remember as a kid that my father's leaving the RSS did not mean that he left the fundamental Hindu household, you know what I mean? So as children, I remember one of the things that was advised is you had to write Jai Shri Ram in notebooks, and I filled up notebooks writing Jai Shri Ram. So if somebody from that kind of background can become somebody like me today, completely atheist, largely extremely left-wing, extremely anti-RSS, whom the RSS wants to kill and rape and telecast alive. And I think that there is something there, you just cannot hold people under such an oppressive system. Women are going to rebel. My father is an atheist today. He was, I don't know, 5 years ago, he was reading the Quran because he's like, I want to know why they're demonizing Muslims. I want to go to the heart of it. I want to understand what exactly does it say and what exactly does the RSS, make of it. And I think this kind of thing that you just cannot, expect that hate will win, because I don't think it does. In fact, the more you oppress women, the more they're going to retaliate. I think that if my father was just a business person or something who had no ties to the RSS, who was not at all Hindu or fundamentalist in any sense, I would have just had a regular school education, become a scientist, or worked with Microsoft or some shit like that. The fact that I had this really oppressive Hindu upbringing telling me what was good and what was bad made me this total rebellious person. Which again is no troubled men. No, I didn't attract them. I was just born into too much trouble. But yeah. So
there's domestic violence in this country as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Mainly amongst the Asian and the British Asian community.
Yeah.
And certainly a couple of my friends have gone through that process and have left their marriages after a very traumatic time. Dowry still exists, even though officially it doesn't exist, and that leads to lots of strife and problems. Why do you think it got imported into this country? and how do you see it going forward?
I don't know, sometimes it really scares me because we have imported caste into this country. And I was trying to once talk about caste, especially as somebody from the south where we don't use caste surnames, at least most of the lower caste don't use in the Brahmins. So I was trying to say, why don't you leave these caste surnames? And there was a very respectful Sikh gentleman who had come all the way to listen to me, who said, oh, but that's because if this surname marries that surname, it's like incest, and so we have to have this surname so that the Gotra doesn't, gets right or something like that. And I was like, no, but you're in Britain, so why do you even have to marry a Sikh to begin with, Like, you just find anybody, you're in this country, you can find anybody from anywhere in the map, I'm a living testimony to that. I was like, and so yeah, in that sense, I don't understand what we're importing. So in Canada, for instance, they found out that women who have like the third child is always among Indian diaspora, it's the greater chance of that being a male child by 3 times or 4 times more than the average, because they were doing sex-selective abortion. This is something to do with Indian diaspora. The other day there was this, dowry death in Australia. So we are going elsewhere, and we're still carrying this, this tiffin box patriarchy, tiffin box bride burning with us. And I think it's dangerous that we're just doing that, because I think at the heart of it, in which we are in denial, is that caste and patriarchy and all of this misogyny is perhaps in the Indian DNA, not in the physical DNA, but in the psyche of how we define ourselves. Maybe we are defining ourselves by the way we treat women, and we are not calling it out, we should call it out and say, no, this is not, India is not the India of, wife beating and dowry death and killing children. India is, India of Katyayani and Kali and, fucking women warriors going to pull men apart, you know what I mean? Like, we have to possibly redefine this narrative, because I think it's just sick, because what is going to happen is that on the one hand, as feminists, we're concerned about it, but on the other hand, there's this huge idea that if you're going to be an Indian woman, everybody's going to assume that you need rescuing. They may be possibly right, but it's not a story that you want around you, It's just crazy, because once you also become a person who needs rescuing, you're never going to be able to speak for yourself, articulate, or even comment on other people's problems. Yes?
Apart from writing the book, what have you done to exteriorize and express your rage? The second question is, how many generations do you think it might take for men to accept women as equals in India?
Okay. Well, how do I exteriorize my rage? I never started out as a writer. I started out when I was 17 as an activist translator, because I was thinking that voices of, really on the ground Dalit voices were not being heard, the mainstream was not listening, and especially all the conversations happening in Tamil. And India is a country which is highly, even though we're completely in denial, they're a very Anglophone country where the English-speaking minority decides and sets the agenda. So I felt that this voice had to come out. So I was editing a magazine that basically tried to also get Dalit voices. So at the same time document Dalit atrocities, because what was happening was that you could have an entire village of Dalit people being burnt down by police forces, and this would come only in the regional edition of a newspaper, because regionalization of news media is also something that's hugely problematic. So it would only come in the local paper, but never elicit response. It was before Facebook existed. So this is 2001, 2002. I was just out of school, so I was an activist for a long time. And I don't know how to explain myself to you, but you should possibly Google and see what I've done to exteriorize myself. Yes?
So going back to the novel, how do you think it responds to, as a portrait of abuse in marriage, how do you think it responds to ideas of traditional modernity and how that sort of feeds into, I guess, an abuse in marriage?
I will just answer her question again. So I've been part of the liberation struggle for Sri Lanka in Tamil, so I've been very vocally supportive, but also organizing on the ground. So in 2009, when Tamil speaking people were facing genocide, I found all students' union which led continuous protests for 4 or 5 months on the ground against the Indian state, asking India to intervene to stop the war. So I was part of the Stop the War coalition, just me being on the street. So, and when Rohit Vemula committed suicide last year, I was fasting for 2 days in the Hyderabad University campus to get justice for him and to sack the Vice Chancellor, to arrest him. So I was one among many students. I was not a student, but yeah, I was doing this. I don't know, every single day I've been in my country and been involved in one way or the other as an activist on the street. And I think, yeah, I don't have to prove my credentials. So I'm not sitting in a room and creating just beautiful words. I think, I spend my time doing other stuff. Anyway, please be loud. I have some.
So your novel as a portrait of women use in marriage.
Yeah.
How do you think it sort of feeds into ideas of tradition and modernity, and how that, I don't know, exacerbates in use in marriage or restrains in use in marriage? If that makes sense.
Yes, I think that the idea that the fact that if it's not a traditional marriage, if you're not very religious, the fact that automatically you shed misogyny, I don't think it's so direct that very modern people can have very backward ideas. You know what I mean? Just the fact that you shed some layers doesn't mean that you become empowered or people are going to become feminist just by that. So I think that's a misassumption. So, and I think what I also try to portray was for me, which is something that is a lot of left-wing misogyny. If you see, even in the far left in this country, there are always rape allegations that surround people, So, and what are we doing even in the left to clean up? So we have brochurist. What do we do for all these mansplainers within socialist movements or within the far left? And how do we either legitimize them or how do we call them out? And I think it's very risky because we are now coming to a crossroads where more and more women are going to join protest movements. More and more women are going to start fighting, especially given the huge economic inequality that exists here or in India. It's inevitable that women become part of the resistance. And when they are part of the resistance, it's very important that they are not subjected to the same abuse that they are trying to run away from. That we don't have all these patriarchs and progressive power who are going to exploit them there. And therefore, I think the left needs a big cleanup. Yeah.
Just curious, in your research, did you find any societies or tribes that were truly matriarchal? So I've heard of the Musu in Tibet and I think the Caste in India, but it sounds like they're just brand names as opposed to truly matriarchal societies.
I'm not sure. One is a question of research, but for instance, you have matriarchal society in Kerala in India, where land holding goes, at least among the Nayars, for instance, you have established matriarchy. But I'm not sure matriarchy itself is the answer to patriarchy. You know what I mean? Because what happens with the matriarchy is a lot of internalized patriarchy where the man is the de facto head, but things are done everyone it's more or less formal, and I think that's why. But I still haven't quite answered the question.
Listening to you and many writers from subcontinent, men do any good deeds? Are the good deeds are no deeds?
Well, they give birth to very strong women like me. That's one of the things, but I don't know. I think this is, I don't know, for some reason, I've been consistently having to battle the fact that, men always assume I'm a man-hater, and it's really absolutely crazy because anybody reads my work would know that, I'm constantly falling in love with men. A man-hater cannot achieve that. But, at some of the festivals, a man will say, can you say 2 redeeming things about men? please, can you just say two redeeming things? Like, how can a whole society be so threatened that you want to hear two redeeming facts about yourself from a woman who you think is a man-hater? You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to feel so insecure, you know. You can take some of this, you know, take some of the criticism, but nobody is, you know, threatening masculinity to such a level, you know what I mean? Like, where you are forced to hear something nice about yourself just so that you can go home and feel, well, all's right with me. No?
Good answer. I have another question. Sorry, could you tell us about your next literary project?
Oh God. Is it James asking you to
No, this is just fun. I mean, I work for James, so poetry, prose.
I don't know, yesterday I had this email from my agent who says I should get back to, get started in writing a third novel. So yeah, that's somebody, yeah, who's really is keen about, getting me to write something. I'm working on 3 or 4 different things at the moment. One of which is a novel.
Any insight into sort of what they're dealing with, or is it all too soon to say?
Well, I think there's one book of non-fiction that I just had to drop by on the way because I was doing this novel and I wanted to finish it. So which is about, it's called How to Get Away with a Massacre, based a rip-off of my favorite shows, How to Get Away with a Man. But it's about all the caste massacres that have taken place in India since independence, and how not even one person has been sentenced to prison for that. And this is about 40, 50 people of a whole village being killed, but somehow the judicial system has, there's so much of impunity that nobody gets convicted. And I think it's not just 1 or 2, because almost all caste massacres are following the same trope. So I don't have any legal training or experience, but just as a writer, I looked at it and I want to, it was a speech, but I want to make that into an essay and publish that. So that's one of the things that I'm doing.
I'm wondering if it's not too personal, but what is your reason for moving to London? And obviously you talked about earlier, you have a very good career in India and you have to start basically from scratch here. Is there anything?
Men.
But is it,
Men. No, it's my partner. He lives here, he works here.
Okay. That's good enough.
So you see, I moved half the world for a man. It tells you, that must tell you something, isn't it? I haven't seen my parents in a year, but yeah, there's some things for love.
Have we covered everything? Any more questions? Well, thank you all.